the venue, and they were the ones that were registering you there. So if you have any challenge, please feel free to speak to any of them or to me directly if you can access me. So that's the housekeeping side. We have quite a packed program and a rich one on something that's really of the national interest, talking about the National Development Plan, which is not just a government plan, but the South Africa's plan. So the minister is the host of this. He will present the political speech that talks to that work, and as the custodian, in terms of being both the chair of the National Planning Commission that advises the country, the president and government on that, and also the political head of DPME, which is the organizer of this meeting, and responsible also for facilitating implementation of the National Development Plan. So in terms of our agenda, now we are on item 2, which is opening remarks and introduction. I'll come back to that. It will be followed by the purpose of the program, which is not going to be long, and then introduce the minister, because we actually want to get quickly to 12:25 part, which is the meet, the speech by the minister. Then followed there by a kind of a performance by Sandiswa Moduna, which is the poetry. We no longer have the band. It was either the poetry or the band. So we got the best of both, the best one, which is the poetry. Then on part 2, we will then have that panel of eminent persons there, which will respond to minister's speech via talking to specific topics that are listed. They are all here. Then there will be a discussion. As the panelists are talking, you are most welcome to continue using social media to communicate, particularly those who are online. I nearly forgot about them. You can paste your questions and comments on the platform, which is the Microsoft Teams. So you can continue doing that. We will have a mechanism of collecting them and sharing it with the relevant people so that they can respond to the issues that are being raised by yourselves. If you are in-house here, you can then raise your hand at an appropriate time during the question and answer part. Then the minister will then come with kind of a sweeping type of a response after the technical input has been made. And after that, then we will close the program. Of course, in between there will be refreshments. I think we do have lunch served here. So we will make that announcement at an appropriate time. The other important announcement on social media is that this event is being streamed live on different social media platforms. There are 2 media hashtags. One, NDP Lecture 2022, that's the Twitter hashtag. And the second one is hashtag NDP 2030. Let me repeat that, NDP Lecture 2022. The second one, hashtag NDP 2030. Then the platforms for DPME, the first one is Twitter @DPME official. So DPME official, all small letters combined, Twitter @DPME official. The YouTube one is Presidency, so that's also live. The third one is Facebook @DPME for Facebook. As I said, we are live on the Microsoft Teams, which is part of this platform. So as part of our new normal, we've got to always remember to sanitize. We also have to remember to be hybrid, use both platforms. So that's what we are taking as a positive leaf out of this situation we find ourselves, which is an unpleasant one of the state of disaster. Without much ado, I will, at this point, go straight to that item on introductions. We are quite many. We had thought that we would allow everybody to introduce themselves, but unfortunately that will consume quite a lot of time. Safe to recognize that, as I said, there are the people on the program. One is the minister in the presidency, Minister Gungubele, which we'll introduce formally. We do have the commissioners from two commissions. One is wearing two hats. That's the minister, the Commissioner Somadoda Fikeni, who is from the Public Service Commission, who is also part of the panelists. But all protocol observed, we recognize your presence here. The other commissioners are from the National Planning Commission, who are also seated around the table with the minister. If all the commissioners of the NPC can raise their hands, because I know two that are here. There is three, yes. Four, yes. 1, 2, 3, 4. The DG supporting the commission at some stage will help us with the formal introduction of the commissioners. Maybe it will eat into your item as well. We do have the commissioners from the NPC among our midst. Welcome. Then we have representations or participants or delegates, not just from government, but we have a whole range of government departments. DPME itself, I see quite a lot of the senior managers, and an apology from the DG DPME is the Forum of South Africa's Directors General is sitting, and some of the DGs are here, both as participants in the program. I see 3 of them. DG is the principal of the National School of Government, the co-host of this program. The DG is the Statistician General, States SA. DG Maluleke, or SG Maluleke is here. Acting Secretary of Planning, Dr. Masiteng is here. And the DG in the DPM is represented by Mr. Mashamba, as you see in the program, who also replaces Dr. Grisel, who had to attend to other matters. We have heads of different NGOs, private sector organizations, the important sector, the media is here. So you are all recognized. As I said, we could literally go one by one, but we have to cover time as well. You are welcome, and we really thank you for gracing this important event. Thank you very much. Now, the purpose definitely of this program, as it is very clear, is to have that moment every year where the minister, who is the lead minister on the NDP, is able to speak to the country about a specific aspect or issues surrounding the National Development Plan. Of course, from a political principle point of view, he will give that overview lecture that really talks to the country about the National Development Plan. Then there will be inputs, as you know, from the members that are listed there, which I will introduce later one by one, who then talk to specific aspects of that work. So it is organized as a lecture in a sense that part of it is to inform, but part of it is to debate, to stimulate dialogue. So do not be surprised when there is a lot of frankness about what is happening and what is not happening, and also hard questions that might not be answered sufficiently, but it's part of that debate and dialogue to ensure that we are able to sustain that momentum that was created by the NDP of a country talking about its development. So this is the purpose of this program then. I would like to pause just in case there is some question or query from the platform, because sometimes we can run so quickly as if we're running a funeral or a wedding, only to find that there might be something that somebody would like to pitch that would like to alert us to. All right, silence means consent. I don't know where the English got that, but I appreciate that it works for me today. Then Next item really is to introduce the minister. We have, the organizers have put the full biography or summary of biography of the minister. And because here you have people, minister, who are also writers and what, I will invite them to deal with it from a biography point of view, because if I were to go through it, you will realize that it might take me the whole day, if not 2 days. As short as it is a very rich and diverse one, but minister is usually very uncomfortable to be introduced in that way, so I'll have to respect that. Safe to say, he has a pedigree of being a member of legislature in Gauteng on different portfolios. He's a member of the ruling party in terms of the NEC. He emerged from the labor movement during the struggle against apartheid. He has played many roles also in terms of different sectors. Portfolio committees in the National Assembly, portfolio committees in Gauteng that he has been chairing and driving specific programs. So that now from the executive side, besides recognizing the work of him being an MEC in the Gauteng government, he has served also the Deputy Minister of Finance, and he now came back again last year, August, to be the Minister in the Presidency, a portfolio that is quite wide-ranging, having departments under it, like 5 of them, the Presidency itself, Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, the States SA, agencies like the MDDA, NYDA, the SSA. I hope I'm not forgetting one of that. So you can see how varied that the work and the task that is at hand. So the NDP really is the anchor of all of that, because all of those agencies and the whole of government and the whole of society is expected to implement. So ladies and gentlemen, without much ado, I would like to welcome the Honorable Minister in the Presidency and the Member of Parliament, Mr. Mondli Gungubele, who will then deliver the keynote address for this occasion. Welcome, Minister. Can you raise a hand of applause? Thank you. Okay, now thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You may be seated.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. They put something on my chest. And they told me that once you've got this thing on your chest, don't gossip about anyone. So, fortunately, I don't gossip. Thank you, Program Director Ntakumba. Very interesting surname in our language. Deputy Chairperson of the NPC in absentia, Professor Tinyiko, who is caught up in his inauguration of a Senate chair. And we thought we should not interfere with him in as far as Mashamba that is concerned. Acting Secretary of the NPC, Dr. Kifilwe Masite. NPC commissioners present here. The panelists, Dr. Professor Somadoda Fige. Did you hear that? I asked Busang what is his title, and I got told later that is Dr. Busa. Oh, he says I'm wrong. Professor Mushubye Maserimule. Not bad, eh? Not bad. Dr. Mahoba. These are all panelists. You can see how powerful the lineup is. The senior government officials who are here. I've seen Godfrey, I've seen a number of you guys. You are many. You are such a powerful team. Assume that when I greet Godfrey, I'm greeting all of you. Those I don't see. Dakumba was fortunately here. Members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. It is my singular honor to present these introductory remarks at this public engagement of the newly appointed National Planning Commission. This NPC was appointed by President Cyril Ramaphosa in December 2021 and inaugurated on the 25th January this year. The term of the third NPC is significant in various ways as it coincides with the following significant context. National Development Plan. The National Development Plan review done by the NPC and presented to Cabinet and the President concluded that during that time that the country's development trajectory is off the course and proposed recoursing the pathways. Relevant to this platform are two critical elements. A capable developmental state requires a professional, appropriately sized civil service. Currently, there are challenges in terms of capacity, stroke capability, frontline services, and professionalization. Those gaps are well known by all of us, that we need fit for proper to manage and run our institutions to deliver as expected. The second aspect is the state capability, which is weakened by the following: fragmented intergovernment relations, challenges in right skill, right job, high turnover, limited performance management, and unstable political administrative interface. One is trying to say, if you hear when the review was done, and the President looked at the review and said, the trajectory is off course, we need to recourse. These two elements are demonstration of the background against or which underlined our ability to stay on course. The other issue is the state of the economy. The challenges in South African economy have over time been worsened by sustained low levels of investment and growth. The economy has also experienced a series of downgrades, including the state-owned enterprises. This has impacted adversely on the cost of borrowing. In addition, low levels of growth and challenges related to revenue leakages have also impacted negatively on resource mobilizations. These challenges, coupled with an increasing budget deficit and a rising stock of debt, has constrained the fiscal space. The key fiscal indicators demonstrate an ailing economy. For instance, in 2019, the GDP growth had regressed from a baseline of 2019, my apology. As we read now, the growth has regressed from a baseline of 2019 of 0.1% to negative 6.4. Unemployment increased from 27.6% to 34.4% as we speak. Employment, the number of people in the employ decreased from 2019 16.3 million to currently 14.9. I think it's no longer 14.9. Resenga is even less than that. You will actually confirm those facts. Somebody said 14.3. I hope it has changed. Investment as percentage of GDP decreased from 16.9 to 13.6. Poverty level, in particular, food poverty, remain unchanged. In other words, as we sit here today, we are speaking of the indicators, which are not a good story, which instead of getting better from 2019, they gotten worse. Although one would say this is against the background of 2021 economy, which has grown by 4+%, which is good news, and also a projected primary surplus in 2023, 24, and so on. So the story going forward doesn't look bad. On the COVID, it is well-known fact that, ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 thrust South Africa and the world into unprecedented and massive crisis. Indeed, South Africa managed to flatten the curve over the past 2 years, and since the introduction of COVID-19 vaccine, we have seen a significant difference in our lives. Before COVID, we already experienced an ailing economy. It will be disingenuous of me not to acknowledge that our economy was ailing even before the lockdown. The persistent shortage and rising cost of electricity has rendered the economy uncompetitive. The impact of COVID-19 on priority sectors such as tourism, manufacturing, and mining has further derailed the country's economic trajectory. At the height of the pandemic and national lockdown, at least 2 million jobs were lost. In the final quarter of 2020, the economy contracted by a record 7.2%. Whilst we are still on the throes of pandemic, we should at the same time acknowledge that we're in a better position than we were a year ago. The pandemic and its effects are now manageable and well on the road to recovery. We need to remain focused and ensure that we do not deviate from our economic recovery plan. We meet at a critical moment in our socio-economic lives when our country and the world is pulling itself out of ravages of COVID-19 pandemic. These and other factors have adverse effects on the economic stability of our country, and panel of experts like the NPC ought to advise government on how to address these challenges of our historic moment. Now, Dr. Sumato Rafikin will already factor in Ukraine and all the related impact. Remember, they supply, in terms of food, things we are capable of planting and not need that supply. But in terms of oil, those are some of the things, because once you disrupt Russia and Ukraine, that's the oil flow, and it means the scarcity and the high price. So those are some of the things which, as we go forward, might have impact in the economy of our country. Ladies and gentlemen, my introductory remarks, therefore, takes due consideration of all the factors that have hindered our development trajectory and seeks to redefine our course of action as we journey towards NDP Vision 2030. The lecture is thus entitled, open quote, Reclaiming and Building a Capable, Ethical, Professional, and Developmental State. The very title of this lecture suggests that something is lost, something is not going right, and something ought to be done to rectify whatever is wrong. This is an area where we need to be very frank about. We need a candid discussion, robust. I was saying one day when I was opening NPC during the inauguration, I was saying Jack Welch says, I like that. He says, candor is a dirty little secret in business. Because when it lacks, but the contrary is true, in a candid environment, he says there's an opportunity of a lot of ideas. 2, he says chances of speed are very high. 3, he says life is run at a cheaper cost. So that's why we call for a candid and a frank discussion. It is in recognition of these factors and more that it is important to reclaim and build a capable state. This moment of crisis requires an integrated response where government works hand in hand with institutions of higher learning, independent researchers, the private sector, civil society and labor, and collectively come up with development strategies to ensure that we recover from the current crisis and restore a thriving economy. That is what the president refers to when he talks about the social compact. I'm sure you'll remember that the president said there is no better time that this country, which now agrees that our economy is in dire state, that poverty is at a highly unacceptable level, inequality cannot be tolerated, unemployment is bad, that if this is not the time to work together, there will never be such a time. To this end, I leave you with the following key viewpoints for your consideration during the public lecture, because mine is not a lecture, it's an opening remark. 1, looking at the NTP review and assist the country to develop a pathway to get back on track to social economic recovery. Consistent with the NTP imperatives, 3 of the 7 priorities adopted by the 6th administration have a component of infrastructure development. Job creation, reduction of poverty, and the growing gap between wealth and destitution require accelerated development underpinned by speedy implementation of national programs. The top priority, a capable, ethical, and developmental state, underpins all 7 priorities of the MTSF. These priorities cherishes the ideal of a strong leadership, a focus on people, and improve implementation capability. This is a big challenge in our country today. We have to work together to improve implementation capability. Number 2, keeping the country on track to ensure the 7 priorities of the MTSF, which is medium-term strategic framework, are achieved. What are these priorities? These are the priorities which the president set up in 2019 when he started his administration. First one, a capable, ethical, and developmental state. Economic transformation and job creation. Education, skills, and health. Consolidating the social wage through reliable and quality basic services. Spatial integration, human settlement, and local government. Social cohesion and safe communities. A better Africa and the world. I'm just, something is ignited in my head when I say consolidating social wage through reliable and quality basic services. There's always, in the public discourse, a narrative that this is an austerity government, in spite of the facts that 59% of our budget goes to social wage. But there is this obstinate stance that our budget is austeric against this background. But I leave this for you to debate. 3, implementation of the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. What about this? In adversity, so often comes opportunity. South Africa is now on the threshold of an important opportunity to imaginatively and with a unity of purpose reshape its economic landscape. The current conjuncture presents an opportunity to reset South African economy. It's an opportunity to build a new inclusive economy that benefits all South Africans. This is a moment for a permanent and decisive break with our past of low and declining growth, falling per capita incomes, low investment, as well as high and deeply entrenched levels of inequality, poverty, and unemployment. Through this program, the country is committed to 1, growing the economy at a rate of 5.4%, 2, reducing unemployment rate to 6%, 3, increasing investment as a share of GDP to 30%, reducing inequality as measured by Gini coefficient at least to 0.60, and 5, total eradication of poverty. Commitments made by SONA and further elaborated in the budget speech. How will these find expression in the work that will be undertaken by the NPC over the next 3 years? Implementation of the fiscal framework, clarifying and charting a pathway to fiscal sustainability, and how to ensure fiscal sustainability. Again, this is another highly debated concept in South Africa. The Minister of Finance said, from the MTBPS, we committed to economic growth and a fiscal sustainability. And he said, we do this by decreasing the fiscal deficit and stabilizing debt. To us, the logic is simple. The fiscal sustainability means, amongst other things, that you need to use the money you have. If you have to borrow, you have to make sure that you restrain the cost of borrowing within levels that don't obstruct you from accessing capital, so that you can continue spending. Because the bigger the deficit, the more costly is borrowing. In South Africa, as we speak today, no less than 300 billion is cost of borrowing. You are taking that money away from road construction, from water resources construction. You're taking it away from improving infrastructure for development. You are taking it away from infrastructure-led economy. You are taking it to cost of borrowing. Those are facts that are there. So that's why we are not prepared to turn our eyes on this. And I dare sometimes want to say there is a debate of the, what do you call them? The modern monetary theory and the orthodox. It's a debate. I'm not asking that it takes place here, because it can divert this summit. Because the modern monetary theorists are saying, if you produce your currency and you have your sovereign currency, you cannot have debt, because you will produce money and pay it. But there's one thing, those who want to follow this line, the MMTs also respect the importance of maintaining the value of the currency, even under MMT. The debate by the orthodox is that if you go to emerging economies, the challenge you have, if you are to throw money in an unlimited way, you stand a risk of failing to pair it with the resources that are produced goods and services that are supposed to actually compare with so that you keep the value. Again, I want to say that's a debate for another day. I request that we don't allow it here. Here, what is confronting us is poor implementation to turn around inequality, poverty, and unemployment. But there's always a temptation to go to that. Ladies and gentlemen, a capable, ethical, and developmental state lies at the heart of our efforts to achieve the goals and objectives of the NDP. Such a state manifests through strong leadership, a focus on people, and a strong implementation capability. Drawing from the NDP, which envisions a developmental capable and an ethical state that treats citizens with dignity, the MTSF seeks to establish a public sector staffed with professional, responsive, people-centered, meritocratic public servants that enjoy a high level of trust among citizens. However, as the NDP cautions, a developmental state cannot materialize by decree, nor can it be legislated or waived into existence by declarations. It has to be consciously built and sustained. I want to conclude in the following way. All of these efforts are guided by broader government imperatives as articulated in the NDP. In particular, the NDP espouses an inclusive economy that will create more jobs. To quote directly, the vision of the NDP is, open quote, in 2030, the economy should be close to full employment, equip people with the skills they need, ensure that ownership of production is more diverse and able to grow rapidly, and provide the resources to pay for investment in human and physical capital, close quote. This is an ideal that is cherished by the National Planning Commission and all other planning bodies in government. Our commitment to this vision is unyielding because the NDP remains our guiding light. It is no doubt that the NDP is a noble and well-considered vision. However, its implementation has not lived up to its promise. With only 8 years to our destination, NDP Vision 2030, we must do things differently. It was Albert Einstein who famously said, open quote, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, close quotes. So we can't run the NDP the way we're doing now in order to meet those goals. The time has come to do things differently. We must change the public image and perception of civil servants. There's a correlation between trust in government and variables like GDP growth and public perceptions of corruption. When GDP growth declines and public perception of corruptions are high, overall trust declines. It is about the future of South Africa, the future of our children, and our children's children. Let us join hands and make South Africa the country we all desire. Enkosi.
Thank you very much, Minister. Minister Mondli Gungubele. Ladies and gentlemen, we classified it as umkombandlela, an introduction and overview, but you could sense the depth at which it went. That's a lot of food for thought. The frank recognition of challenges of our time, inclusive of those that the NDP itself identifies, the triple challenges of unemployment, poverty, and inequality, issues of lack of growth and specific sectors that you went through, and very important stimulating questions.
Oh, she has corrected.
Some laboring on the academic discourse that he had advised that rather don't dwell much on that, the orthodoxy versus the modern monetary economists. And a whole range of things that I would like to dilute, because the reason that the organizers have brought these eminent panelists was exactly to do that, so that as a program director, I just make sure that we move forward. Even if we miss time in between, at least we go out of here almost at that time that's indicated on the agenda. So without much ado, ladies and gentlemen, I think let's give another round of applause to the Minister for really that very comprehensive input. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. At this point in time, I would like to invite that item, the poetry.
Oh, is it?
There is poetry that by Sandiswa Maduna. Where I come from, I grew up in the deep rural areas of the Eastern Cape. And part of what was always encouraged when there is an imbizo, which is a traditional type of a meeting that happens on various reasons, there will be an imbongi. But I think they had to stop it at some stage because of some of the challenges that emanated with other people moving around, diluting that very important part of our tradition and culture, which you can see that it's there all over the world. If you think of Shakespeare as an example, he's a poet first and foremost, leave alone the being a writer and everything. Because in there is wisdom that comes. There is a sense of taking us to the future, also recognizing the past. So an imbongi doesn't get introduced where I come from, it just springs up and say what they want, because somewhere part of it had to do with inspiration and degree of spirituality in there. So ladies and gentlemen, in doing that, I just wanted to ensure that you know the value of poetry in our society, especially in troubled times. But of course, their friends is not something to be debated. So where is Sandis? You need to spring up and do your job, madam. Thank you.
Hello there. Hello there. Yes, I am beautiful. See, I am made of amplified curves and succulent breasts.
Sure.
But it doesn't end there. I am a masterpiece, and if you are brave enough, you shall reach my mind. I am no regular commodity, I am not. Bought with silver and stones appealing to the eye, I am more than dust and breath, now call me woman. For in every stride I take, I tell stories. I continue to retell them with my smile now. Tell them, sisters, that even in our pain, we remain strong. Even the stripes drawn on our bellies is just the resemblance of the strength we possess, for we are meant to stretch into whatever shape and size we desire. Designer, for he who created the heavens and earth dwells in us. Re bo mmangwane ba go itshwara ka fo bogaleng di kgatlamela masisi. Now please, sir, when you come across me, just say hi and call me Prudence. Thank you. That was just my introduction. Thank you very much. Thank you. My name is Sindiswa Maduna, and I am honored to be a part of this function. I am a youth, and I am witnessing this, and I will tell them at the grassroots level that our leaders are doing something about the turmoil that we are facing as a country, as a continent, and as the world. So I just want to thank you. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Thank you to everyone who's a part of this event, because I know that you are working, and like I'm saying, I will tell them. The earth is finally cracked open. The blood of warriors, it seeps through the cracks of its foundations, those laid thick with lies, deceit, and dishonor. It is shaking, the ground breaking. Like the walls of Jericho, it is trembling. My grandmother speaks. My mama weeps. My 6-month-old daughter, she screams to the top of her lungs. Obituaries are no longer final statements of departure. They are silent cries from beyond the graves. Femicide is not a face. Madoda, sabelani, isikalo, sabafazi. For my sisters and I, we are stacked together like pieces of wood, our bodies amid gases of hopelessness. Ngoba na thokozela ukusidlwengula, ukusibulala nokushaya inhliziyo zenu zalangazelela ukubulala umfazi. For Karabo Mokoena still speaks. Tsofatso Pule and her unborn baby, they weep. The women of South Africa, in unison, we come together. We kneel and we pray that this reality of ours changes. We hope that we give birth to sons of a different breed. That our daughters don't have to go through the same reality as we do. But until then, we will pray and hope that the shackles on Eve's feet are loosened. For the earth is finally cracked open. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. As I said, it's one part of the program that you don't debate, but because she happened to have used some vernacular, theme of the last part, which is the gist, because the earlier one was introduction, was around femicide and the specific names that she mentioned and the pain that it has caused to our society, to the women in our country, and all of us, when our sisters, mothers, and children, the daughters have been maimed and slaughtered by their own loved ones and the closest. Yeah, so I didn't explain why I said in some of the rural areas, Izimbongi, the poets, people decided to stop. It was not necessarily only because of them, it was because of the sensitivity of the new generation, because an Imbong is allowed to insult you as well. So some of the new generation was not happy that you would insult an Inkosi or something like that. But thank you, sis. It's a very important input. I've just consulted with the organizing team. They tied the minister under that chair. You'll never find him on Mondays. Never, whether you like it or not. But I don't know what the magic they have done. But they said, if you do lunch, you will be wasting minister's time. So let's continue to the end so that he can also do his closing remarks. Otherwise, he might be instructed by the people he reports to go elsewhere. And at least now he's tied under that chair, so he can't go. So without much ado, ladies and gentlemen, we do have a team of panelists. They are sitting here, but I will request them to come here one by one as they make their presentations. What I will do is to just briefly introduce them now, and then they will just, I'll call the names for them to come through. The first one doesn't really need an introduction, is Professor Somadoda Fikeni, whom I think all of you should know, because he is a well-known commentator in media. He is a public intellectual. He is involved in discourses like production of these the scenarios for our future, and yeah, he is somebody that has been journeying as a public commentator with the New South Africa and before. Just the first paragraph on the note that you have there, just to know where he is now. Professor Somadoda Figeni is a scholar, public commentator, community development activist, and he was appointed at the Commission of the Public Service Commission of South Africa in February last year, 2021. So on the 2nd of February 2022, he was then appointed as the Deputy Chairperson of the PSC, and he has just now been requested to be the interim chairperson of the PSC. And of course, then he has, as an academic, studied in very many universities in the country and beyond, and is now currently also a visiting professor at the Nelson Mandela University here in South Africa, and has received quite a lot of recognitions, among which is those that are listed in that profile. Without much ado, let me invite Professor Somadoda Figeni to take the podium. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.
Program Director, I have this second gadget that we were told we should open before we talk. Program Director, Honorable Minister Gungubele, the fellow commissioners from the NPC and the executive leadership, in a room full of such galaxy of leaders, the rector of the National School of Government, fellow panelists, I greet you this afternoon. Molweni, Dumelang, Sanbonan, Abshe. I just want to raise a few issues following a very direct clarion call from the minister. Complicated. I'll just try to get this one out. Okay. Emma Klesbeni, we do not have all these complicated arrangements. You stand up and talk. It's such an honor to be given opportunity to share the stage on behalf of the Public Service Commission, where I am now, in case you wonder why I've disappeared from current affairs analysis, the space I've been in since May 1992, which was 29 years. In the last 3 years, I felt I needed to step back. It's always nice to leave the stage whilst the song is still on. The significance of this lecture coming at this time cannot be overstated. If you just look at the last 2 years, every other report is so depressing that some of the people have withdrawn from following news. Whether it's a Zondo Commission investigation into PIC, PRASA, New Gen Commission to SARS, or even in the private sector, the biggest corporate scandal we've ever seen in terms of staying off. It's been a litany of unethical behavior. I just want to start reflecting on what I call are the profound paradoxes of our democracy. Because that is what we're all about at this moment of deep crisis. During a Fed season, we may not have reflected seriously on these. Because now we realize each time an SOE fails, taxpayer must pay. Each time we have a budget deficit, certain services have to be surrendered or deferred. I think this lecture will be worth a while if we begin to deal with these paradoxes. South Africa is being hailed as having one of the most progressive and good constitutions. And we do have some of the most celebrated governance frameworks around the world. Many people journey to come and learn. We have King 1, we have King 2, 3, and 4 of the governance frameworks. And we do have some of the best business schools in terms of training and schools of government, wherein people from around the world and the continent flock in. And yet, we have seen the proliferation of unethical behavior. The question is why? Some of the best policies that we produce, one time I was a keynote speaker of African parliamentarians in Malawi, and they were saying South Africa has some of the best policy frameworks, well-researched, consultants have been brought in, and we often go to the internet just to extract them because we know they'll never know we've taken them and just change the names because they do not implement them. So to me, another paradox is each time we invoke the word coordination and integration, be sure that silo mentality, toxic competitiveness between different units is going to follow. And I even wonder, Minister, with the district development model, how you are going to disturb these rigid silos where national, provincial, and local are not coordinated, where different units across departments are not coordinated. So allow me to be provocative in a sense of saying why everything has failed. Why even Batupile has failed, putting people first. Why has moral regeneration failed so emphatically? We have all these structures which are meant to promote ethical behavior by public servants, by the public in general. But every indicator shows that we've taken them in, recited them, and started moving the other direction. That's why we've taken a detour today as a country. Surely we're not where we were supposed to be, and we're not where we were. We are in time between times, and place between places, as Reverend Finga once said, talking about the state of our nation. I just want to say, maybe time has come for us to reflect on the sources of these, because it's clear that our system has become a patrimonial system where patronage networks have taken over the system, where loyalty instead of competence is the most rewarding thing. If you get somebody, you appoint somebody in terms of loyalty instead of competence, something that professionalization of public service is trying to wrestle with, has become a key issue. Even the issue of deployments themselves, conventionally that is not a problem if it is known where it starts and where it ends and there is competence. But the problem now, it has degenerated into literally the patronage networks, sometimes factionalized. But what is to be done? We recognize, Minister, the efforts to reform and to capacitate entities such as the NPA. We recognize, Minister, the professionalization framework that the National School of Government has been crafting, and the review committee, which Prof. Will be speaking to the chairperson. But the question is, how will they be different? What conditions are we preparing so that we begin to see real, tangible results? We are a country that is fascinated with meetings, an over-conferenced and an over-workshopped country. When we realized that in the last meeting we called it Likhotla, we called the next one Indaba, the next one we say it's a Bosberat, the third one we say, and so forth. Have we come to understand as the elite that we are here that this is a good PR exercise, or have we become honest about wanting to change? Because very often, it's not for the lack of meetings, it's not for the lack of documents, it's not for the lack of policies, but something has happened to allow for these profound paradoxes. Maybe we've even mastered the art of saying the right thing and doing the wrong things. Look at how the Auditor General has been issuing reports after reports. Irregular expenditure continues. Wasteful expenditure continue. This workshop, therefore, or this seminar, we should be reflecting on what must we do to change that mindset. Before I make the last 2 points and sit down, I'm reminded of two scholars. In fact, the other one is a businessman, not a scholar. Warren Buffett says, chains of habit are too weak to be felt until they are too strong to be broken. When these tendencies come in, we don't feel them. But when it is too late to break the chain, it is too late, we can't, the chains have become so heavy. So what are the things that we among ourselves have learned, but we refuse to admit that these chains now are too big for us to break? Because routinely we've done these things. For example, look at how many people have privately complained about this COVID-19 and now working from home. They say, I used to make a lot of money out of travel allowances. Now, this travel allowance dependency makes one not to wait for invitation, but to Google for invitation. And when you are permanently away from the office, because you want to notch that 40% of your salary, which is travel allowances, who is doing the work? By the time you come back and the pile is up, do you do the thorough review before you approve? Somewhere these chains have to be broken. The second quotation was by another sociologist who wrote, Alvin Toffler. I think it was The Third Wave or The Future Shock, one of his books, where he said the illiterate of the 21st century will not be the people who cannot read and write, but people who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Our inability to unlearn the wrong tendencies that we have inherited. It's not the big names that you see, the obvious ones in the Zondo Commission. But it is the sum total of all of us. When a police officer in a metro refuses to go into an intersection where traffic lights are not working, instead hide under the bush where you can ask for 50 rands, pretending to be doing work. When we ourselves create travel to a point where we've been desensitized to the fact that your travel, your hotel, somebody could have been given that money to start a spaza shop, a barber shop. And I wonder, Minister, if the problem is also not how we've mastered the systems. The cynical compliance regime where people demand bonus because I have not stolen. As if you were employed not to steal instead of reading your mandate. Stealing ought not to have occurred anyway, but in nowadays, look, the AG says, I have not taken money, I want my bonus. And yet, the houses you wanted, I'm happy at least now the predetermined objectives have been factored in. But the cynical notion of saying, if I comply, instead of saying, if I effect the mandate, it's one of the unethical approaches to this. I also wonder if the convoluted compliance and regulatory regimes have not disenfranchised and disarmed the public for knowing what is happening. Every other sector in its compliance has a book that is 800 pages. You need a consultant. You need experts. Even when you want to tell somebody has done something wrong, they say you can't say this, you need a lawyer. The lawyer needs 6,000 rands to just put a sentence, whereas, something like that. But I want us to actually walk out of this meeting saying, how do we make the promises, the frameworks, the policies become something that we internalize in our ethical landscape in an intrinsic fashion where no one is watching you behave ethically? Because whilst at the PSC, Minister, nothing saddened me the day we had to write letters to ministers to say, some of your officials are fingered in stealing 350 rands. Some are chief directors. These 350, that people queue up whole night next to post offices. We're a country that needs a moral code, because the levels of greed have reached a cancerous level. We no longer, siphetweli fufunyane, we no longer can control ourselves sometimes from doing wrong. And the most fascinating thing is that even those who have done wrong, from public officials up to the highest levels, they don't feel a sense of remorse whatsoever. They want the next opportunity. And that, to me, this workshop would do well if we say, how do we resolve these paradoxes? And the crisis moment we're in is the best moment to attend to these problems. Many other countries have turned the course when they never allow a crisis to go to waste. But collaboration between different role players is key. The problem is that PSC will do monitoring and evaluation. Your department minister will do monitoring and evaluation. You find that Parliament is doing monitoring and oversight. And we are pulling from the same fiscus. And you'll find that we have 5 reports on the same thing, but we never sit down to talk about how we coordinate. Because this is a lean season. We no longer have the surpluses we once had. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Somadoda Figeni, for that provocative input. I will just pick up on one, the agreement with the minister that this is an opportunity. Minister says it's an opportunity to reset the economy. Prof. Somadoda Figeni says it's an opportunity to change our habits, not talk the right things and do the opposite. Without much ado, I would like to invite someone who is representing the DPME, DG Robert Nkuna. That's the DDG from the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, Mr. No, you're confused here. Sorry, they sent me your profile through the system, but I would rather just talk freely. You don't introduce Amaphakathi comprehensively when their king is around. Mr. Godfrey Mashamba is a very seasoned public servant. He has 2 masters, with strong background in economics. He has served in different capacities in the public service until where he is the head of a branch in the DPME called Evaluation Evidence and Knowledge Systems, which deals with issues of data, with evaluations as well as the research that informs decision-making. He is passionate about that area of work and drawing from also his experience in science and innovation systems, broader research and development environment, national statistical systems, and so on. So without much ado, let me just give over to Mr. Mashamba to take the podium. Thank you, sir.
Thank you and good afternoon. And Program Director, Honorable Minister, the Chair of the National Planning Commission, and the commissioners, colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. It's always awkward when you get introduced and they read your profile. I was like, is this me? All right, thank you. I stand here today as delegated by the Director General of the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation to make an input on behalf of the DPME. And I was asked to speak on the issue of interdepartmental coordination, which I think is an issue that must be looked at from different dimensions. But I only chose to touch on three issues, dimensions of that, which are trying to respond to the remarks that were made by the minister, and also reminding the colleagues of the introductory meeting that the minister had with the commission when they were introduced to the department. The three issues are coordination expected between the national departments. Second one being the coordination that is expected between national, provincial and local government, and also how government different parts of government coordinate themselves in engaging a private sector and the civil society, because I think those are very big issues. They present themselves in different ways. Very well-known problems of coordination that happens in those spaces, that the dynamic, it's an ever-present problem of coordination that needs to be revisited over and over again because the context changes and requires us to adapt. So the minister remarked that whatever the disruption that we face, we must not divert from a sustained plan of national development. Part of that is to be on the alert of how the context is changing and the nature of problems it throws at us. Furthermore, the minister also reminded us of the danger of path dependency, maybe not using the same words, but he reminded us of the danger or tendency to want to continue with what we know. Dr. Masoma Tafikin also remarked on that. How do you expect a different outcome when you continue doing things the same way? So with that said, the think tank in the NPC must be frank with identification and characterization of the problems we face as a country, because that is a sure way to make an attempt at actually finding solutions to the problems we face. That is very important. And the problems of coordinations, as I said, they are well known. That is why major policy initiatives of government, they've always acknowledged this. I mean, the NDP itself, in the chapter on governance, it does acknowledge these problems as a persistent problem that requires constant attention. We know about the system of ministers and DG clusters. It has been there for quite a long time, since the 1998, somewhere there, with the formation of FOSAT. But the problem of coordination is still there. So I'm reminded of the recent study that we did to evaluate the functioning of the clusters, which makes recommendations that are not even a surprise to us, Minister. One of the recommendations is that the Minister in the Presidency must provide leadership on that particular issue to make sure that we realign as government in that space. The MTSF makes important inroads in that space. I mean, it talks about the efficient and integrated government, and there's an issue of a single public service that we always speak about, but how do we actually do this in practice? In the MTSF, you'll find that the MTSF does take the points that Minister has made about the priorities of government that were contained in the 2019 SONA and also in the manifesto of the ruling party. It takes them, articulates them under 7 areas, including the mainstreaming of issues to do with gender, women, youth, persons with disability. But it goes further to say each of the activities or deliverables under each of the priorities. Having said that, it also goes further to say who are the supporting departments, because that means coordination is built into a system of planning. And then there are structures such as clusters that forever meet and discuss these things. The outcome delivery forums, which brings together a number of actors in the space to see how implementation is actually going. But there are still problems there. So which means that we need to give this continued attention. The district development model has been introduced, led by COCTA, as a model that need to help us to improve coordination intersphere, from national, provincial, up to the district level or municipalities, so that we can see how national aspirations convert themselves into what happens in a street corner, in a village somewhere. So these are mechanisms that are in place. So there must be all right, apologies for that. More recently, the onset of the COVID-19 has demonstrated the power of coordination, coordinated actions of government. We saw that, obvious examples that I will give, Minister, which are articulated in the country report that the DPMA has produced, that the structures that were set up very rapidly brought together a range of actors in government and in entities of government to, on a day-to-day basis, address the issues as they were coming up. Problem identification, the power of information sharing was actually very obvious in this process. Not only amongst the actors in the national departments, but also national and provincial and also at the local level, information sharing, communication that even captured the imagination of the nation around how at the United Front, government was actually driving a major intervention of a challenge that we faced at the time. So there is a case study also of the SAPS, the policing system, on how things were working in that space, which provides very useful insights around how to coordinate and work under so much uncertainty without a blueprint, and with very important outcomes in terms of helping the resilience of the nation. So maybe in concluding, I must just indicate this 3 points that if the debate does ensue later in this discussion, we need to look at. That coordination presents itself in various forms. You have coordination at the level of policy, where we require greater coherence on the policy aims of government across government. What is done in the system of statistics, SG, must also help what is done or cohere with what is done in the system of industrial policy, what is done in innovation space, what is done in the education space. So policies must cohere if we are to make a progress. There's also problems of coordination at implementation level, where different parts of government must contribute in the implementation of agreed policies and programs. MTSF makes an attempt, but in practice, that's where challenges are as to how do we actually implement in a coordinated fashion among the different actors. And an issue around institutionalization, which is another problem. Institutionalization, I mentioned that because trying to draw attention to the pace with which practices or new practices are adopted by various actors who are supposed to be working together. We have seen others getting left behind when there is a new wave, and that creates problems. This issue around data sharing across government, the issue around ICT systems, those are practical issues that need some sort of intervention, digitalization and all these things. If we are to make a move, we have to get some way, to find some way of coordinating cross-cutting issues. I will make maybe a last point here to indicate that the DPME and NPC do work together. We need to strengthen the institutionalization of information sharing between the department and the NPC. And as the new leadership is ushering in, it's an important space to renew that commitment of how do we actually enhance that space, because NPC with its mandate forms a very important pillar of how government should actually work, or the society should actually work. Thank you very much, Program Director.
Thank you to DG Mashamba for that input. So the next speaker is Dr. Mechi Mokhoba, who will now talk on the issue of capacity and skills development. Dr. Mokhoba is a lecturer at the School of Languages and Communication Studies at the University of Limpopo. He holds a PhD from Cardiff University, Wales, where he was a Commonwealth Scholar and a teaching assistant. He obtained his master's degree with distinction from Newcastle University, England. He has worked broadly, focuses on intersections of power and discourses, covering topics such as race, black economic empowerment, neoliberalism, social policy, oppression, empowerment, and transformation of South Africa. So I felt I must read his deliberately like that, partly because we need more of Professor Somafikeni's, of course with his own flavor. As a fairly young academic, I'm inspired. Welcome, Dr. Makgoba. Please take the podium. Thank you.
I want to use this one. Is it working? Will it work? Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, the Honorable Minister, the panelists, and everyone here. I'm honored to be sharing my ideas about what I think a developmental state should be in South Africa. But I want to take you back a little bit because I believe that history is very important in how we conceptualize policies in any given context. It's Henry Clark who says history is not everything, but is a starting point. History is a clock that people use to tell the political and cultural time of the day. It is a compass they use to find themselves on the map of human geography. It tells them where they are, but more importantly, it tells them where we must be. So South African developmental state has to be looked at in the context of settler colonialism and what sort of institutions we have adopted or inherited from the colonial administrators, and what are their visions of transformation, and how can we reconfigure those institutions to make sure that we build a capable state that is responsive not only to issues of poverty and inequality, but issues of racism that still informs the work of government institutions even today, even though that the settler himself is not there, but the structures that are still in existence, I'm gonna extrapolate on that as I move on. The structures that are still there are still colonial in nature without the presence of the administrator.
Okay.
I want to take you back to Maguban, who said, the Union of South Africa in the 1910 ensured that the political, economic, and social power was the only exclusive preserve of the European. And what did that do to institutions today? Is it something that has passed, or is it something that still informs our material conditions even today? And I want to also quote Ben Maguban, who also said, apartheid and colonialism dependent on the relationship between colonialization, the desire to take the land, and that of capitalism, the desire to exploit black labor. And as I move on, I will show you how are these things still affecting us today, and what sort of developmental state we need in order to respond to these issues. Maguban wrote a book that was published a long time ago. It was titled The Making of a Racist State, which means there was a considered effort to build a racist state that respond to a certain developmental need. So post-1994, have we thought about an anti-development, anti-racist state that responds to the critical foundations that build a racist state from 1875 to 1910? That is the bigger question, because that racist state not only affected people from a distance, it has economic, legal, cultural, religious, and those institutional routines and practices are still informing the work of government and the work of the practices, institutional practices that...
Orientation.
Yes. So what are the outcomes of this capitalist imperialist in South Africa today? The context is that of continuity. We are living in a neo-colonial state, but the settler is not there. But the institutions that are left there are still having a colonial orientation. And that's where I'm going to talk about the roots that we have in terms of corruption. How did we inherit it, and what can we do to deal with it? Despite the establishment of a liberal constitutional order, the inclusion of a large catalogue of justiciable social economic rights in the Bill of Rights, as well as legal reforms in the areas of remedial equality, anti-discrimination law, blacks still constitute the majority of the poorest, the most disadvantaged stratum of the South African society. That is not an accident. The vast and deep injustices that blacks suffer not only as a consequence of the legacies of the systemic racial discrimination, but also the normal routines of every day, which stabilize and perpetuate the existing racial hierarchies and inequalities, either by denying them in terms of post-racialism. We did not deal with the race as a structure, and we moved on to post-racialism, and race as a structure keeps on showing its head by informing the logics of different institutions of society. And we also have concept of downplaying those issues in form of liberalism. We are looking at formal institutions of governance, but we don't think about what are the ideological frameworks that informs those institutions. Because if you look in many African states, the only thing that the government owns mostly is the building. But when you go into that building, what is the culture that drives that building? What are the decision-making structures that drive that building? What are the social divisions of labor? Because when you build an institution, there will be where you design a structure of how people are going to be executing daily activities. And are those divisions of labor of that of the colonizer or that of the new government? That is a big question. The last one is the concept of culture. We see culture in terms of traditions that is isolated from the political economy. But the big issue is that culture is the fulcrum of economic development, because it is the institutions that should be culturally responsive to the needs of the people. And equally, it also speaks to the issues of corruption. If we thought about building a capable state, and we realized that the type of cultural economic institutions that we inherited were corrupt in nature, because they were designed to serve a specific minority in South Africa. But have we taken time to say, what sort of cultural reforms or restructuring do we need in terms of building an individual who is going to be responsive to the needs of our people in terms of running these daily activities of these government institutions? One thing that I also want to talk about that is also been downplayed in South Africa is the issue of race and class, the intersection thereof. And I borrow from the work of Magubane here. And he says, the political economic structure of apartheid capitalism constituted race and class as a political economic differentiation that gave rise to race and class-specific forms of exploitation, marginalization, and deprivation of the racialized black people, which means the starting point there was the racialization. And even people who join government as leaders are still a racialized people. But have we thought about finding ways of de-racializing them as an individual, that this person is this particular leader, and we've appointed them to lead this institution? How are they still, how do they think about issues of race as an individual? And how does that affect their work of government? Do they look at government citizens as people, human beings, people who deserve their respect? Or they are going up with the class structure that, look, I'm in government, I've arrived, because you have now this political power and everybody has to hear from you. It's not that political power is being used to build communities, but political power has been used in a way that it's perpetuate classism or class hierarchies. So race and class are very important because the structure expanded through the hyper-exploitation of the racialized people, the appropriation of their land, resources, in the reproduction of white advantage and black disadvantage through the workings of racialized structures. And when we are tackling structures such as deeply embedded as race and class, radical measures are required. Otherwise, the system merely swallows up the small improvement one has made, and everything else remains the same. How does it remain the same? We have inherited a corrupt apartheid system. But the three elements that I have talked about, decision-making structures and power, the social divisions of labor and culture, have remained untouched. So we took a historical approach to building a state that what we inherited, there is even myth that the apartheid state was good and the ANC has destroyed the government. There are people who follow that line of thinking. What they don't know is that actually the opposite is true. The government has inherited a corrupt system, but the reconfiguration of that system was actually rushed in form of policies that were passed since 1994 without having used those policies to learn from our mistakes, because policies in themselves are not meant to empower people. Policies only respond to how the institutions are built. Because if you build an institution and you impose a policy that is not in line with the orientation of the institution, the outcomes are not going to be favorable to you. And for that, I'm going to quote Ferguson, who says, whatever interest may be at work and whatever they think they are doing, they can only operate through a complex set of social and cultural structures so deeply embedded, so ill-perceived that the outcome may be a baroque and unrecognizable transformation of the original intention, which means that we can have grand policies about building the state, but if we don't build our institutions in a way that align with the policy, we will always be in the same place, because not only we have issue of ethics and corruption, but we have the issue of questioning the type of policies that we ought to implement, because implementation actually in policy development is the last line. What are the institutions and what are the people that are going to be leading those things, those institutions and the implementation of the policy itself? So alongside the failure to deal with the three things I've mentioned with his decision-making structures and social divisions of labor, we have experienced issues of externalization of political responsibility. And that is very common in the mining sector, that while we are building a capable state that is leading development, there are spaces where government takes a back seat. And you can see it with the mining sector, the mining charter in South Africa. When you look at the mining charter in South Africa, you'll think that is an interventionist document. But when you go deeper, you realize that actually there's an element of externalization of responsibility in the form of externalizing community development to mining corporations. And a corporation is not configured to develop people. They are configured to make money in the most cheap way possible. But that sort of development has been abdicated to mining corporations. And we're surprised that in terms of community development, nothing is happening, because mining corporations only take the logic of capitalism, which is to make money. And what did that do to the state? We have actually developed what we call the audit culture, where we develop policies, but because the institutions are not configured for the implementation of those policies, we have entrenched this audit culture that encourages racialization of performance, tokenistic gestures of accountability to the detriment of real effectiveness. How does it work? For instance, in the form of BEE, you have a policy such as BEE, and what you do is that mining corporations or any corporation or company has to just submit an annual report which they demonstrate their compliance with the policy. In that process of managerialism, the political role of that policy is lost, because now we are focusing on this compliance mentality. But that compliance mentality has nothing to do with social and political issues that were raised in the first place. Why? Because South Africa runs a democratic state that operates according to what we call interest group pluralism. How does interest group pluralism work? The processes of interest pluralism restrict public conflict primarily to distribution issues of organization of production, public and private decision-making structures, and the social meaning that confer status and power go unraised. Which means that once we, in this democratic state, especially where one party doesn't have full majority, the discussion about oppression or poverty or inequality moves from what can we do, what needs to be done, which is the starting point. We have oppression and we need to do something about it. But the conversation moves to what can we do, because there are a lot of constraints, and that constraints comes with the model that we use, which is interest group pluralism. You can see that with the mining charter. Before a charter can be accepted as a government policy, mining corporations will be lobbying. And through lobbying processes, the original document is going to change completely from what the government wanted to do, because the corporations will take the government to court, they'll use the media to campaign, and in the end, the root cause of our problem is lost in the process, and now we are focusing on the constraints. And what causes this? This is caused by the fact that we see the adoption of the distributive paradigm of justice, which limits the conception of justice to the allocation of material goods, such as things, resources, income, wealth, and the distribution of social positions, which means that since 1994, what we've been doing, we have been actually trying to see what can we do with the social wage. But the work of institution, the cultural work and the institutional work of making sure that the institutions are responsive to issues of poverty, which has a black face, which are responsive to issues of inequality, which has a black face, as well as unemployment, which has a black face, have been sidestepped because we operate with this distributive paradigm of justice. This paradigm ignores the social structure, the institutional contents that often determine distributive patterns. And that reminds me of this myth in South Africa that BEE has failed because it has benefited a black elite. BEE is not a structure, and it cannot benefit a certain type of individual. The structure, the economic structure that of neo-apartheid is the one that is driving distribution in South Africa. So we cannot single out one social problem in South Africa to BEE. It means the system that we have inherited is not working. But because BEE came as a form of blocking how the government can go, how far can the government go in terms of transforming the economy, now the problems are shifted to BEE. And majority of us have bought that myth that BEE has failed, and BEE hasn't failed. It has achieved exactly what the creators have wanted to do, which meant to block the manner in which we can think about transformation in South Africa. So, what's happening now? Where are we? As I've already indicated, there's some level of race consciousness in government policy. But that consciousness, unfortunately, is in line with the government's neoliberal plan. And when you follow a neoliberal project, you can talk about that, you acknowledge the fact that black people are still poor in this country, and you need to do something about it. But at the same time, you have to acknowledge the constraints of the global markets. And I think that is what has been happening, that the moment you take a neoliberal framework, you dehistoricize all the problems that you've identified, because neoliberalism or the markets don't recognize race and class and gender as social problems, which means we're going to be focusing on what can the markets do in order to deal with the problems. And the instability of the markets would not be responsive to embedded structural problems, because structural problems would require a government that is attentive, people-centered, the government that is professional, and that respect citizens. And that sort of political conversation, when we talk about the markets, doesn't arise, because the market is all about distributing what's in the market. It's not about social conversations that we can talk about. So I've identified a few areas that I think the government needs to build capacity in order to build a capable state. But before I go to that, I want to say that since we've been focusing on redistribution, the breaking down of the social wage according to different infrastructures and social departments and their work, it means that we are only affirming what has happened in the past. When we talk about transformation, we have not really thought about what is transformation in line to what happened in the past. That's why the word transformation in South Africa has become a substitution for the word racism. When people say there's racism here, they would normally say this place is not transformed, because the word transformation has been perverted to the level that we just throw the word randomly, which means that we're still at the affirmation level, but we need to move at the transformative level, which would mean that we need a deep restructuring of relations of production that bless group differentiation, and those can help remedy some form of misrecognitions that comes in terms of gender, race, and class. And in terms of how can we also use culture to respond to our economic needs, we need to look at our institutions and ask these simple questions. What sort of cultures are practiced in those institutions? What sort of corporate and legal structures are embedded in those institutions? Are they responsive to our needs? If we talk about building a coherent economic development, is everything in the institution or the institutional routines and how they mobilize the resources speaking to the type of visions we have about the state? And that's where we can start having a genuine conversations about transformation in South Africa. But here are the key areas that I think that we need to think about in terms of building a capable state. Firstly, I think we need to have simple things such as a model of development. We need a model of development in the sense that I can give you an example with rural development. When we develop in a community, what sort of vision do we have about that community? Because that's what's really happening. It's quite triggering and sad, because let's talk about it in this way. One tender would be out, the person will come, do the roads. 1 year later, someone comes and do roads construction. And what happens? Normally they have to destroy parts of the roads to install water. And now they realize that the community doesn't have Apollo lights. They have to go dig the same roads and destroy some parts of it to give us Apollo lights. And later they realize, the drainage system is not properly done. They go to the same road. Instead of figuring out how can we tame the water and channel to a certain direction, they chip some part of the road, the tarred road, destroy it, which means that we have a high level of economic regression, which comes from how we are unable to husband our limited resources. And secondly, how we have been struggling to build an efficient state institutions or efficient government that simply responds to social needs with speed. Because the sort of community uprisings we see speak to the cultures that we have in our institutions. Do we have the culture of respect within our institutions? And do we extend that to the citizens? Because if we extend that sort of respect to the citizens, it would mean that when they knock in the mayor's office and say, we do not have water, if we are keen about building a capable state, the mayor will make sure that the people do not have water, and water is very important towards restoring the dignities of people, and he will make sure that something is done with speed. In summary, or in conclusion, what we need and to think carefully about is what I call the 3 building blocks of a developmental state, which means we need a correct identification, recognitions of the challenges of the state that state faces based on history, as well as the understanding of the global constraints. Number 2, the ideology and the philosophy of those responses to the challenges. Lastly, we need capable leaders, people to drive and manage an effective government that is focused, efficient, and speed in execution. And that government has to be people-centered, because first and foremost, the role of government is to look after citizens, not the other way around, that citizens are funding the financial and administrative irregularities that we see in municipalities, that they are happening in those municipalities, but later they go back to the taxpayer, which means that we actually, as citizens or taxpayers, funding the actions of politicians in government. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you, Dr. Mokgova. Without much ado, let me invite Dr. Masiteng,
Yes.
who is the Acting Secretary of the National Planning Commission. Dr. Masiteng, the podium is yours. As she is approaching, just a brief introduction. As a very seasoned public servant who has been there over the decades, from the health sector and Stetsese, you might have seen her announcing those health statistics, including the ones on unemployment, and now decided to come back to where she was born, which is in the presidency system, where she used to head a unit in the PICAS called Governance and Administration, which started quite a lot of these things that we take for granted now. She is quite seasoned in the understanding of the determinants of poverty and inequality, and a whole range of issues. Without much ado, over to you, Dr. Masiteng.
Yeah, did our Wi-Fi get a little bit later? Okay.
Thank you very much, Minister, Commissioners, all the leadership of government, and all the other members of the public in this meeting. Thank you very much. I will try and be very brief. I think a lot has been said, but I just want to say, because we have all looked back, I hope that we start presentations that take us forward and we look forward. But we continue to hammer on what has worked and what has not worked. We stand here today, we are 10 years into the implementation of the National Development Plan. We have 8 years to go. And therefore, by now, I am sure the country, not just government, should be able to say we know more what has worked, we know better what can work as we move forward. I want to let you on what Professor Fikeni said. My response to that is that no matter how long you have taken walking on the wrong path, it is still always possible, when you are decisive, to turn the corner and do it right. But I think in this case, the lessons are there for the country, not just government, to move forward in a better, decisive manner and way, because we know that certain things happen deliberately, and therefore they should be dealt with deliberately too. And maybe it is when one speaks to the issue of corruption and things that have hampered the progress, as the minister presented. And critically, one wants to put the finger on the issue of a developmental state. The principal might know this discussion is long, has been long overdue, but it has matured over time. Basically because it sounded like it is a qualitative issue, untouchable, does not have numbers, and then it takes too long because some of the issues become very, very emotional to address, especially issues around the politicians and administrators and in government. And critical issues that the principal would remember is when the first MTSF was developed in this country was in 2005, went to cabinet, and the first question that was asked in that cabinet was, okay, this is your first 5-year plan, 2005 to 2009. After all has been said, are you capacitated, are you organized to implement this plan? That question is even more important today than it was that. And I critically want to also just raise the issues about this issue of the aspirations of South Africa as a state, aspirations of South Africa as a country to be a developmental state. It has been a long journey. The aspirations have been there since the early 90s. And this was when the country was grappling with the issues, trying to be informed by the past and in relation to the developmental, especially on the issues that the country grappled with. There were nothing else but social and spatial injustices that the country faced. The issues of economy, some of us can even tell in 1992, this country was in a recession. So we can even imagine the type of country that we inherited when we go to 1994. Maybe, Prof, one day you will tell us why it was in recession in 1994, and then there was democracy in 1992, there was recession, and then there was democracy in 1994. The dream that is espoused in this issue of the developmental state, I pray that I don't talk numbers today. I'm happy my SG is not here. But we need to hone in this issue of the, I don't know what happened, I didn't catch it.
Hey, we want to hear that.
We need to deal with the soft issue of a developmental state. We will count how many are there, we will count the economy, we will count the social transformation issues, but I guess the critical issue, I do not know what happened here. It's fine. This dream of a developmental state has been embedded in very critical issue of being people-centered. It has been about processes that are about the people. It has been about the ability for the country to implement the Freedom Charter. It was about the country to be able to implement the Constitution. If you read the NDP, that's exactly what it is. And when we read these things, we think the plans are new. No. If we know where they come from, context will always matter. It is about the people. And the attributes that have been advocated for in terms of implementing a capable state has been about ensuring that the capacity of the state, and sometimes when I speak about the state, it's about the country, South Africa. It is about the state, which is expected to run and implement things for change to happen in the livelihoods of the people, but also for the livelihoods of the people to be sustainable. And these are the things that we put aside and then we start counting. The critical issue about this is the ability or the capacity or the capability and abilities of the state to intervene in the economy to ensure that there is sustainable development. We cannot talk about something today, such as Kabele's Palin, and then we are looking at tomorrow. There is 2030 that we are looking for. I will never, I promise, Minister, speak again about why we have not implemented. Where I am employed, I hope my bosses are going to allow us to look forward. Utomye last week, maybe he's here, this issue of how far we have come has been punted for too long. We just now want to talk implementation CRP. What do we want to achieve? How do we want to achieve? If you are going to measure anything, just measure how far we are going.
Stop crying.
Yes. Let us just measure what have we achieved. We know what we have not achieved. Let us change the course of counting poverty and maybe start counting prosperity. And let's see if something will change. Let us stop counting unemployed and start counting the employed. Let's see if that will change. And when we change and count such, let's start now counting in the remaining 8 years, how many people have come out of this poverty. If they are not, it's fine, but you wanted to know how many. And as we do this, I think the critical issue that remains to be done is that we understand what has worked. And I will just say the 3 things that we think when we talk about this capable state we want to talk about. A capable state should be able to have the required human capabilities, institutional capabilities, serve and provide services to the people, but also be agile enough. When critical things come, it should be able to change with the times. We have been tested by COVID. We have been tested by many other problems. The agility of this country is what would define the capability of this state to be able to change the lives of the people. The other things, I think we know more, we can count them, but I think, again, the critical issue of being ethical in this country cannot be lost. An ethical state is driven by the constitutional values. An ethical state is driven by the principles of the public administration and the rule of law. Those are the critical issues that cannot be lost if we talk issues ethical. One of the things that I made as argument since 2004 when we wrote the 10-year review, Prof, if you remember, Principal, we said the issues that are known about corruption in this country are identified by government itself. 80% of the cases that we know about corruption in this country are identified within and by government itself, and therefore it is government that can assist in dealing with them. But who is partaking? And therefore, when we move about this ethics and then changing the whole issue, it's about the whole of society. Those that want bonuses because they have not stolen, and those that have stolen should be part of the solution, so that they tell others why I stole and why I will never steal again. And the state shall only be developmental. This is what is just about the way I talk. A developmental should be able to meet the people's needs. The day we start to account how much of the needs of the people have been met, how much and how many lives of the people have been changed positively, then we would be talking about a developmental state. And we are happy because there should be an issue of being very interventionist, deliberate. The country and the state should be developmental because there is participatory governance. It is about the people, therefore there is nothing about the people in this country without the people in this country. The issues of active citizenry cannot evade the systems when we write and create very critical, and I call them critical, systems. Those systems cannot not have people in them. When we fill in our APPs and our boxes, let's start seeing the people in these boxes, so that it will write a better story when I say that we have improved in service delivery, and then it's about how many people have got water. Is it quality water? Where do they get it? And how does it change their lives for better that they have access? The issue of just transition, when it is emerging and is spoken about now, it is no longer an economic issue. It is about sustainable livelihoods. It is about the fact that when you get to that just transition, nobody should be left unjust. Nobody should be left with anything that has taken away their lives. And I think in critical times, the only thing I will go to is there are only few key principles and prerequisites for the implementation of the NDP. As I am saying, I am praying that I will never say how many are unemployed. I will never say how many are in poverty going forward, but to say, how do we bring everybody to this and become part of the story and write the story of development for our country collectively? Therefore, it is about the whole of society. It is about being able to ensure that successful implementation of the NDP depends on the availability of all of us. Where was the private sector? Where was the civil society? Or maybe there might have been contribution that the civil society and private sector has done, but we have not deliberately measured it and measured only government and only find the results that have not seen the impact that could have been made. I still attest that only government cannot reduce poverty. I actually think there is a particular proportion that can be invested by the private sector so that the poverty in this country can be reduced. I still think there has been a role of civil society that has not been measured, that has been played, and because of that, we still have the number of people based on the monetary side of measurement, my best way of measuring poverty. So I'm still willing and hoping to learn how to better do so. So of critical points is how we move forward through the advice and the work with the NPC to start to advise what are the trade-offs, what are the priorities, and understanding the current environment fiscally, responding to the critical issues of understanding what we have here, we found here. And until we deal with it as the issue of the past of apartheid and try and say we are still struggling with a system that was well planned. And therefore our planning should be stronger and better. And of importance, I think the three issues that I would like to leave is that there should be deliberate partnerships, collaborative leadership. Everybody should be part of the implementation of the NDP. I hope from this year, when we write any report about the implementation of the NDP, we should be able to say this 60% has been contributed by government. This other percentage is the contribution of all other sectors. And then we will see when we measure the implementation of the NDP as a whole of government. And therefore the other processes that should be able to be strengthened is when we monitor, don't monitor alone. When you monitor, don't monitor as government and monitor government and then say it's the country. When we monitor, we should be able to say, if it is about the country, where is everybody else? Here is government, it has set systems, and the systems in government are able to tell us, even in numbers from Statistics South Africa, for how far we have come. But we have never asked, but when so and so, when social partner, so and so, what have you contributed? And I hope that would assist us going forward. The social compacts that the President is talking about in monitoring, in measurement, and in implementation remain critical. And lastly, the whole issue of collaboration, partnership, and being deliberate in working together. Leaving no one behind is not only for those that need services. We should not leave anyone behind, even when we lead. The issue that this is my responsibility, it is not yours. It's going to take us backwards, not forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Masiteng. Because of time, I have censored myself, but I'm really excited. I'm learning a lot. And without much ado, let me invite Professor Busani Ngqaweni, who also is a very seasoned public servant who has been involved in the agencies, if you know, youth sector broadly, and is a public intellectual of note that some of you might have seen his writings. He has served most of the presidents and deputy presidents of the post-apartheid South Africa, that is after, in various capacities, and recently was the head of the policy and research services in the presidency, and then currently is the principal of the National School of Government. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me. Afternoon, Minister and fellow panelists, as well as those who are joining from home. Because a lot has been said already. A lot has been said. Does this work? And then this one doesn't work. Okay, let me go back to this one. Okay, so a lot has been said, so I'm not going to then go back to deal with the issues of theory of the NDP and developmental states. I think that has been adequately covered. I think I'll just reduce my input to using few examples as a way of demonstrating the meaning of building state capacity and how it affects each and every one of you in this room. It affects the minister as much as it affects the most junior persons in this room. Because oftentimes people get trapped into the definition and they get paralyzed because they're unable to understand what it really and truly means for them. So I only have 3 slides. There were 90 because I got a wrong brief. So I've cut from 90. I've cut from 90 to 3. So I work for a self-funding government department. So I've got my colleagues who are monitoring me at the office. They want to see you signing up orders tomorrow so that you can take up some of our courses. And the colleague at the back is linking this thing up. But basically, let me illustrate it this way. Each one of you working in various capacities in public institutions, you have a responsibility to deliver something. It might be that you have a responsibility to deliver a policy paper, or you have a responsibility, in the case of Home Affairs, to deliver identity documents, death certificates, marriage certificates, and all manner of administrative instruments that the department is responsible for. If you work for SASSA, you are responsible for something very basic, which is getting people who qualify their social grants. If you work for trade and industry, you are responsible for a number of things, from registering businesses, those who wish to register, up to offering incentives to those who need incentives in order for them to run their businesses. If you work for local government, you must issue permits, you must do bylaws, you must provide water and houses and all other responsibilities of local government. So everybody, regardless of where you are in the public sector, we are responsible for delivering a particular service. There are challenges indeed of measuring such things as producing a policy paper. I once said in a performance assessment of a DDG of one department, he was giving himself a 4, wanted a bonus because he wrote the paper and he sent it to cabinet. And he wanted a bonus because he said taking it to cabinet was going beyond the call of duty. That's what he said. So, but regardless, we are expected to deliver a particular service, which may include advice even to a minister, a mayor, a premier, and so on. There are measurement issues, of course, but in many instances, because we are providing goods and services that can be measured. So what does state capacity mean in this regard? I'll use few examples, because these examples must be used to prick the conscience of people who think their jobs are so complex to measure the impact of what they do, because this is not their bluffing. Department of Home Affairs used to be the skunk of the public service. At least 15 years ago, every article you read was about Home Affairs and the inefficiency of producing IDs. In the many newspapers, Sunday World, Daily Sun, everybody was complaining about how they wrote their IDs wrong, how they were delayed, how they were declared dead, and so on. And you know, most Home Affairs was part of Bantu Affairs. You know the history of that institution. But over a period of about 7 years, and this is well documented with empirical evidence, Home Affairs today can give you your passport within 15 days. That is the fact. It took about 7 years to re-engineer. They are able to give you an ID and a passport within 15 days. That is the reality of the situation at Home Affairs. What did they do? There was, of course, the work that was done in the back office. They mapped out the entire process. They understood exactly what it means to shorten the time it takes to produce an ID, to reduce mistakes, and to deliver IDs in a correct place where they ought to be delivered. So they built their own capacity to produce an ID in a situation where the majority of people in the country hated the department. And they went to re-engineer their all processes from within. They hired the skills they did not have. They know exactly what it means and what it takes to produce an ID. And that is why it can be done within 15 days. Whereas other departments, and I will mention names here, I mean, people like me to be controversial anyway, no one can tell you why it can't take 60 days to produce a water license. No one can. Because the system have not been mapped, it has not been automated. We don't know what happens in the back office when you have submitted your water license. Well, I suppose 2 years ago, NETLEC gave an instruction that this process must be shortened because it is frustrating to business. Also, in many metros now, they are mapping these processes and they are automating them so that you know what it takes to produce to approve a building project and things like those. The reality is, in many cases where you don't receive a service as a citizen, it is because you have someone who is a water technician who does not know how much chlorine must be put in this water for this water to be able to be drank as a safe drinking water. So the first part when you talk about capacity is about whether the person can measure the amount of chlorine in water. That is why people can't drink safe water, because those fellas there don't know, right? I mean, some of them may even be diplomas and so on in chemistry, analytical chemistry, but they still can't do so. So this is the issue of the know-how. Then there's the issue of the system, because when you put more or less than what you ought to be adding into the water, something must be able to tell that, no, there's something wrong here. Why is it that we are buying gallons and gallons of chlorine? Because supply chain might be buying them on time and so on, yet there's still a problem of the quality of water here. And when you actually do an assessment of why there's a water quality problem, you'll find that, no, in fact, it's about how the chlorine is added onto the water purification system. And we have no way of measuring and detecting whether or not those who are responsible are doing the right thing. Now, if you go to DTI, they did just like Home Affairs. Building their own internal capabilities as a department, they hired software developers who worked on the BizNet portal. You can now go and apply for a business while sitting here and you will have it up and running within 24 hours. That is what the DTI can do. They were able to understand what capabilities were absent, went and recruited those and brought them into the system. However, you can't do that if in many departments, as is the case now, colleagues who work at HR have no appreciation of what it means to build state capacity. Because these fellows there at HR in the state, they will want to use the same job description of hiring a CIO as they did 20 years ago, which means it's someone who's able to make a computer, speak to a printer, speak to a server, to operate a LAN and a WAN. That's what it is. Those are minimum requirements. Check most of the adverts of CIOs in government. So the challenge, and those who are at HR must appreciate the needs and the requirements of these departments in order for them to make a change and not get people to work in IT who can't do software development, who can't do cyber security, who can't work in a cloud environment. In a most basic sense, that is what state capacity means. Now let me give you a last example here of SASSA, because all of you are affected by it directly or indirectly. So COVID comes in 2020. Here is a state institution that has gone through a very difficult period as a result of it working with the post office and having to work independently. You all know the case of SASSA. Suddenly, they had to give this social relief of distress grant, SASSA. What did they do? And it's a most basic example. I will give you the numbers. Since that date, remember they were not given 6 months to build a system. They were not. They had under 60 days. SASSA received 14 million applications since that date. This 350 that people talk about. 10 million of those were approved. 180,000 of them were found to be questionable, including those by public servants. Now, 180,000 of 10 million, some of you did statistics here, like my friend Kifilwe, so you know whether it is statistically significant or not. And they were able to detect those people retrospectively. Now, what's the point of this? SASSA used the most basic of technologies to process 14 million applications. They use WhatsApp. All of you are on WhatsApp. They use USSD. All our grandmothers are buying airtime and paying for electricity vouchers using *#. All of them. And they used email. Now, it means an organization made an assessment of its own capacity at the time and took a decision that they will build their capacity to process these applications using technology most accessible to the people. So there was innovation there. You may actually think it's a stupid thing to do, but they processed over, for over 14 million applications, and 10 million people were successful in getting their social grants. This is what building state capacity means. It doesn't mean that you must go to a place somewhere and buy some machine that is complicated, you don't know how to use. Make an assessment of how can you improve the service of the department, of the directorate, the sub-directorate you work for. How can you improve the service? Once you have understood the measures you can take to improve the service, and you take practical steps to doing so, you are contributing towards a project of building state capacity. So when you see people like analysts like Dumisani Hlope, Professor Sumata Dafigeni, Marcelo Mulde, always on TV engaging with this discourse of state capacity, you must always break it down to something that is most relatable to you. Because all of us, in closing, Minister, and you represent the executive, so I can say this to you. The executive in South Africa today has a challenge of rising unemployment, rising hunger, poverty, and the economy that is not performing. The state as a whole, to me, is like a one-ton truck. We are a one-ton truck, we are carrying 100 tons. It's impossible to do so. So we have few options to re-engineer your vehicle to be able to carry the load that you are carrying. And that's a basic definition of building state capacity. You can actually change the axles of the truck. So we are modifying the truck because we are building its strength and its resilience and its ability to carry the load. Once we have added more axles to it, and adding more axles for us colleagues means us hiring people who can do the work. We are adding axles because we are augmenting there. It means retweaking the engine of this one-ton truck, Minister, that you are driving with the executive. By tweaking the engine and increasing the torque, it means we are building systems and processes that will enable the state to carry its responsibilities in the most reliable and transparent way, because you know what follows what. So there is a reliability in the system. You may have to change the tires, Minister, because we are a one-ton truck carrying a 100-ton load, and we've got retreads. It's impossible. It means you must get rid of the retreads in the system, and there's a lot of retreads in the system. There is a lot of them. Hence my challenge. Hence I'm challenging every DG and every minister now. I'm challenging everybody. I don't want to enter into a debate about state capacity with a leader who has not done a skills audit in their institution. Because we are carrying retreads, but we have not done an audit to check how these retreads, because you can't carry a 100-ton load with a 1-ton capacity vehicle, and we haven't even removed the retreads. Get rid of the retreads in the system. By the way, by looking at PESEL data, We actually even know how many people will be exiting the system in the next 5, 6 years in terms of them reaching retirement age. By doing proper analytics of pay-as-you, you will know how many people, how many posts you can phase out, consolidate and hire cybersecurity. Many young black kids here who are excited, who want to work in the state, funded by NASFAS, who are studying all these 4R type of skills. They are unable to do so because our adverts say you must have 4 years of experience in the state. It means the retreats continue to run the system. So this is my challenge to all of you colleagues. All of you, because you are sitting in interviews tomorrow, employing people, and you will be employing those retreats, because that's what we do as public servants. We just want to perpetuate the status quo, replace the like for like, and we wonder then why is it that we are not improving or building state capacity. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Naweni. There is a mask here. Is it yours? Okay. With your permission, Minister, and the esteemed panelists, because of the time and the efficiency that Prof. just emphasized, we would like to restructure the agenda to allow, firstly, the voice from the Planning Commission, because I told you there are 4 commissioners here. And then the second one, to allow Minister to immediately come after the input from the NPC. Then that allows any of us, if they had to jump to another important engagement, not to feel that they are embarrassed because time that you budgeted for is expired. But we'll then continue with the debate after that, at least up to 3:30. With much ado, we have on our midst Professor Mashupi Herbert Masarumule, who is a new commissioner in the National Planning Commission, but not a new person in this debate. He's one of the foremost experts on matters of public administration and governance. He also a public intellectual of note. You have seen him in the media and TVs. He is currently the Executive Dean of Tshwane University of Technology's Faculty of Humanities, and is also the editor of the Journal of Public Administration, where he's also known for inputs in that regard. He also serves volunteers as the lead person on the high-level task team appointed to assist government through the NSG on this finalization of the National Implementation Framework for Professionalization of Public Service and Administration. So I've highlighted just a few important things, but without really delaying anything, let me invite Professor Masarumule to make an input. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Am I audible? Okay, great. In fact, I was actually talking to Dr. Masiteng that probably I'm the most unfortunate person because I come to the commission, Professor Tinyuko Malulega is my boss. I go to the university, Professor Tinyuko Malulega is my boss. He's chairing his first Senate today, and as a result, he couldn't come here. And he did not actually request me to be here. He instructed me. So I'm here basically representing Professor Tinyuko Malulega. Colleagues, let me just start by saying thank you so much for this conversation. Your introductory remarks, Minister Mondli Gungubele. I mean, it was a very important intervention. And also, I think it is very important that I must thank your department, Minister, and the National School of Government for creating this ideational platform for the Commission to really start to have conversation, because that is critically important. I listened carefully to what Dr. Masiteng was saying. The point that she emphasized was that you can't really claim to be a democracy without people. Whatever that you do, people ought to be in the center. So conversation of this sort, and I was very clear that they were theme a public lecture, because public lecture by nature invite everybody to be part of the discussion about our reality. I listened to all what was said, and also I was grateful that whatever that was said, it was said within the context of this important theme, building a capable, developmental, and ethical state, right? Which in aggregate, I can say that essentially all what we are grappling with here is a question of building state capacity. And I listened to Principal Ngaweni, he broke it down, right? And it's quite interesting that when you talk about the question of state capacity, we are also inevitably talking about the history of the state itself. And I often prefer to quote this a very interesting economist, Alfred Marshall. He once remarked, I'm quoting, "The state is the most precious of human possession, and no care can be too great to be spent on enabling it to do its work the best way." And I think that we are here to make sure that we change ideas, the objective being to enable the state to do its work the best way. That is why I couldn't really think of the more appropriate way to capture the essence of what is actually coming out of here than to repeat what Marshall said. And he said what he said in an attempt to untangle the central paradox of capitalism: existence of poverty among plenty. And listen to what he said. He said that the answer to this paradox lies in improving the quality of the state. And we are all here to still, more than a century later, after Marshall said this, indeed we are here grappling with the contradictions of the evolution of the post-apartheid state, where the national grievance, as colleagues have already indicated, is about poverty, unemployment, and inequality. COVID-19 has decimated our economies and thus exacerbated socio-economic injustice for many. And as my fellow panelists put it, because of this, our work as the National Planning Commission is cut out. In other words, we need to answer the question, how can the quality of the post-apartheid state be improved? And the answer is quite simple. It's by producing best ideas about building a capable, ethical, professional, and a developmental state, which, like as I pointed out, is the theme of this engagement. We are all in this conversation. It is critically important, but the devil is actually in the detail, including how to go about in translating ideas into action. As we deliberate on this question, we need to also ask a fundamentally important question related to the strategic logic of our policy orientation relative to the notion of a developmental state. In other words, does the thinking that shape our policy orientation appreciate that democracy is not only a condition for development, but its outcome? I'm saying what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen, to underscore the point that democracy without social justice runs the risk of becoming a self-inscriptive hubris. I must also hasten to say that South Africa is not bereft of great ideas, but the agency to see them through. Let me illustrate the point that I'm making in this way. In 1996, we adopted the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, which only came into operation in 1997. It is good that immediately thereafter, Batopele principles were promulgated to give effect to Chapter 10 of the Constitution. However, it took 11 years to write the basic values and principles governing public administration into the pieces of legislation governing the public service, the agency that I was talking about. The NDP was accepted in 2012, if I'm not mistaken. However, we only started to write its recommendation related to stabilizing the political administrative interface into law only in 2021. Only in 2021. The Public Service Amendment Bill, almost a difference of 10 years between the time when the NDP was adopted and when we started to formalize its recommendations. We need to urgently deal with slow turnaround pace related to our commitments. South Africa is not bereft of ideas. South Africa lacks a sense of agency. I'm saying this also, ladies and gentlemen, to make a point that we are preoccupied with the issue related to build state capacity, and this issue has always been part of our earlier efforts at the administrative reform and transformation agenda, which the NDP had brought into sharp focus, where it clearly stated that a developmental states need to be capable. In the last discussion we had in one of our task team, an important point was made that perhaps we need to theorize state capability more to ensure that there is clarity of thoughts on what we mean by this. But I listened to Prof. Ngangweni. He is already there. He is already at the level of praxis. And yet we are still talking about theory. We assign one of our colleagues who will be working on this aspect. I think is Professor Maxwelling, because he had made a very important point insofar as this matter is concerned. But also, ladies and gentlemen, I think that our analysis of the countries which had managed to evolve into developmental state shows that state capability is the function of efficient, effective public sector, which is characterized by being staffed by the nation's brightest and best public service servants, functioning without bureaucratic gridlocks, and capable of being innovative in addressing the social and economic needs of the citizen. Dr. Masiteng earlier made reference to agility, and that is the type of the public service that we are actually talking about. And because of this, it stands to reason that one of the ways in which capability within the state could be institutionalized is by professionalizing the public sector. The minister underscored this. Professor Fikeni underscored this. However, professionalizing the public sector requires decisiveness, where we should answer tough questions related to employment versus deployment, without necessarily getting into the platitude of binaries. We need to also be decisive when coming to the question of the security of tenure of our DGs. We need to be decisive in terms of answering the political administrative interface question, because the review of the NTP clearly shows that these questions are still lingering. Coupled with this, we need to also answer questions about the macro organization of the state from the perspective of the attempt to optimize its efficiency for the good of society. And this should include reasserting the strategic position of the Public Service Commission in our system of governance, as the creation of the Constitution assigned the responsibility of promoting the basic values and principles of public administration, which a professional public sector should embody. Of critical importance in building the capacity of the state, which needs urgent attention, is local government sphere of government. it is as if it is the orphan of our democracy. Yet, it is a very important point of intersection it's a very point of intersection where state meets citizen. To build a capable, ethical, developmental state requires a strong strategic relation between the states and various sectors of society. This is the point that was made. Amongst this, I want to single out institutions of learning. You see, because institutions of learning give us an opportunity to recreate society. But are we using that opportunity? I'm singling out institution of higher learning because also of the fact that government, Minister, is not the cause of the pipeline problem in terms of enhancing the capacity of the state, but experiences the brand of its effect. In other words, while Professor Ngaweni is trying his best at the National School of Government to offer training within the public service, we need to do more to influence change at the source. And you can ask the question, what is the source? The source is our institution of learning, which are supposed to be the fulcrum of talent pipeline. In other words, there should become reliable sources which give us ready pool of potential candidates who are qualified and prepared to step up and fill relevant key roles within the public sector as soon as they become vacant. I'm raising this point because often we complain about the quality of the graduates our education system is churning out. In the context of social compacting, we need to work closely with these institutions of learning to influence their curriculum. We need to consistently emphasize this because this is where we need to start if we want to build the capability of the state. There is no way that we can succeed in building the capability of the state if institutions of learning are not part of that effort. One thing which I often emphasize as part of our teaching to address the ethical disposition of those who teach for the public sector is that our focus should not only be on developing the cognitive faculty of our students, but our focus should be also on, more importantly, character formation. And I will tell you why I'm saying this. Those of you who are brave enough could actually withstand the sort of details that came out of the Zondo Commission. We saw brilliant engineers who, unfortunately, their ethical disposition was found wanting. A brilliant person, unfortunately, find himself or herself in that situation just because of the fact that the character formation part is lacking in that person. And that is where, as institution of learning, we need to make sure that we make a serious intervention. Education is not just only about building a cognitive faculty of our students. It is also more importantly about character formation. And these are the issues, right, that largely most of them came so eloquently in the work that we've been doing around professionalizing the public service. And I hope that the minister and the colleague, Professor Ngaweni, will definitely look at the report. And when we meet again, we'll talk about the outcome of the implementation of the report. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof. Masramul.
Thanks.
At this point in time, I'd like to invite the Minister to make a response out of these inputs from there.
I had time, where is this thing? Okay. If I had time, I wish I would speak without reading a speech. I don't have time. If I can tell you the number of institutions Godfrey I'm supposed to claim to be leading, it's quite a lot. You hear what I'm saying? I'm supposed to claim to be leading. You see, when I listened to the panelists today, I felt like leaving this job and spend time so that I can also be invited as a panelist. And just also go to school again a little bit. I'm not going to refer to everyone. I felt the things some of us believe in confirmed by all of you. I think the question, having listened to Dr. Mkhoba, is, I always challenge that brilliant statement. Are we helplessly racially established? Are we helplessly racially established? I wonder how you know. All human beings emerge under particular circumstances. In our case, ethnic supremacy has been circumstances under which we emerged. Do I make this point? So human beings generally don't emerge under circumstances of excitement. But human beings over time prevailed over those circumstances. Question, are we helplessly that? I think some of you have tried to answer that question. To me, that's the question we should answer, amongst others. One thing that one of you spoke about, unless you identify and define a problem, you will always cry about it for the rest of your life. You will spend millions trying to resolve something you have not identified, you have not defined. Most of the time in our country, that's what is happening, which Godfrey must be turned around with speed. We spend and allocate billions to resolve problems that have, if identified, at least not defined. And if we work under those circumstances, we stand the risk of being perpetual complainants, permanently aggrieved. Always, my mother did not go to school, could not read and write. You know what she taught us? 5 of us. I'm the only one remaining now. Painfully so, but I have accepted that. She used to call us under difficult circumstances. And she used to say, you know, in Xhosa, by the way, if I put it in Xhosa, it's going to be too difficult here. With a little understanding of meaning of English in Xhosa, I'll try to put it in English. She used to say, my dear children, 3 boys, 2 girls, whenever you have a problem, it's your problem. Doesn't matter how it got to you. Do I make this point? Mama said, once you have a problem, it's your problem. How it got to you becomes irrelevant. Says the first question you must ask, what do I do? And then she says, as a result of that, you will have no time wasting your emotion, hating people, having a lot of enemies in your head. Because you will have used your energy positively by assuming responsibility for your problems. The biggest thing that in Africa, I want to argue, that affects us. We spend millions of money complaining about problems. Even writing books, giving one another awards for the best articulator of the problem. I can go, you read more than 90 books written by Africans. We explain apartheid, supremacy, colonialism. That's how we give one another awards. I want to argue a lot has been said about that. Can I say that? A lot has been. We do not want to go to the next step. What does Thabo Mbeki say in 2012 on the 100 years, writing about Oliver Tambo? He says, national democratic revolution has got 3 steps. He says the first step is political freedom. He says we got it in 1994. He says the second step is to deal with the legacy of apartheid. The third step is to build a new South Africa. Professor, hey, you are difficult, man. Maseremule spoke something that connects to me. He says, learning institutions are the centers, I'm using my words now, of recreating people. That's why I'm saying we cannot be helplessly, racially established. We must spend a lot of time, what does Thabo Mbeki say? Defeat the legacy of that establishment. So the most important thing we're supposed to do is to characterize the legacy of apartheid and measure one another's performance on how we are denting it. Now, black people, man, must start getting awards for coming with a new scientific invention, for coming with a new car, building a new style of a chair, a new style of that. We've written books. It's fine, it's enough. You know the danger? If we continue being this permanently aggrieved society, the children, our children who are born under us, read these books that are so articulate about racial supremacy. Remember, as a father, if you master explaining this supremacy to your child, you are a hero. You are the first hero of your child. So you are telling your child how powerful whites are. Don't think it does not affect them. I don't want to quote certain books because I'll undermine the writers by accident. You're telling your child how powerful how Fairfoot made us, how Fairfoot made us, how Fairfoot create. No, you can't be telling your kids that. If you tell your kids that, it's a rear mirror. You know a rear mirror? You just jab, but look forward all the time. Look forward all the time. So I'm saying, it's important. I respect for your age to articulate history in the manner you've done. I don't know how to explain it anyway. But I'm trying to throw in my closing remarks a line. I'm proposing a line of thinking because I'm not an authority of thinking. I'm just proposing a line of thinking from my experience. Now, TM says 3 steps. Huh? Can you get out of, we've got the books now. We've got the Bible. We know who was Jesus, how did he die, Joshua, Maria, Samuel. We know that, we'll keep on quoting. But let's quote for reference
checking how are we performing in turning around the situation. So any book that comes now must analyze whether we're denting the legacy of apartheid. Fine. Now, what I like about Masarimule is that if you listen to what he says, you must, in a nutshell, I understand him to be saying, build a new mindset. Build a new mindset of self-sustenance, self-responsibility, self-care, self-initiative. My mother says, it is your problem. Damn it, sort it out. We can't have these analysts who are on television. I'm sorry, I nearly said, Sambalandiwe nje, no, ulandiwe. You get first because you happen to wage the worst insult against government. And then you come for the first day. Because you insult more, they call you and pay you for appearance. You end up wearing suit. There are brilliant guys there. We have seen Abu Dubisan, Abu Fikeni, they've done their job. Right? There's a theme I'm trying to plant as we move forward. And I want these discussions, by the way, to continue. I spoke with Dr. Masite at least a minimum of 2 times a year. But I'm arguing, this is what Professor Masarimula said. I'm arguing that when we come back, we must be reporting to you government performance. And say, when we met today, these were the plans of government. We want you to follow so that after 6 months, whatever, when you come and take this podium, critique government performance organically. No longer floating difficult words. Right? So that's a challenge. What do we say? This is 14 million, Safuni cell phone, Safuna land, and so on. Now, Dr. Maseno says, is advocating for a South African who grows from within to determine the outside. And he says, it's education that does that. You know what education does? It exposes you to yourself. I'm not sure if I make this point. Education explains you to yourself. It gives you the power of clarity. And you end up saying, wow, I can do it. That's what education does. You don't say, after getting school, say, they can do it. You say, I can do it. Imagine, I hope, I'm touched you guys were too good. That's the problem. I once tried, Dumsani, to define what's the purpose of education. You know what made me to have a view is when there was this debate about Rose must fall, saying hide the apartheid statues, hide them somewhere, no one must see them. Then if you don't see them, you will be a strong African. Otherwise, when you see a white statue, you feel very weak, you feel agitated, you get angry, you break and throw stones at building because you see a white statue. Now, you know what that means? It means how powerful it is to you. It means it's an awe. You are overpowered because you don't have what Prof. Masarimula says, education that creates you from within. So that you are not a victim of position and possessions. Because when you are not developed from within,
Your sign of success depends on what position you hold and what you own. So, let learning institutions be the centers of recreating people. Now, towards the end, what informs the capability of the state? I'm going to be very controversial. It's not a university. It's not even a school. I'm saying something stupid now. It is the state of the people. The capability of the state can only be explained on the appropriate response to the state of the people. First of all, identify the problem, define it in the state of the people. You can't sit somewhere and say, capability of the state is that we must have a university, must professor, and whatever, technicians, somewhere in a closed room. You must look at the situation that you are going to address, and it must tell you what kind of organization you want. So you find the capability of the state in line with its relevance to the state of the people. What is this that we're talking about? The object of change. Oh, Godfrey knows, eh? Godfrey? That's our language this year. Everything we do, we must look, its sense, its usefulness, its meaningfulness must be measured on the basis of the object of, what is the object of the change? It's the people. So if your capability of the state means your proper response to that, then you're a capable state. If it means then you must have professors, thank you very much, we love the professors. If they are a product of responding appropriately to the state of the people. The problem we have here, this is what Godfrey was speaking about. We spend a lot of time comfortable in doing a lot about nothing. Last point. This topic can take 3, 4, 5 days. The biggest challenge is that we need to master the theory of change. What makes the needle move? Those are the basics that we were speaking about. What makes the needle move? What makes a difference in the state of the people? For instance, if you say you want to deal with unemployment, you must first define what is unemployment. What's that? Explain that thing, right? And then immediately you explain it, it means it's your point of departure. When you want to depart, you can't move without knowing where you are going. Says, this is a problem. I prefer something else. Something else is your end state. You cannot take a journey without knowing where you are going. But you must have explained, why are you living where you are living? Why do you live there? Why do you go away from that place? Or why do you want to change this thing, right? But the theory of change, therefore, as we analyze the plans of department this year, we're trying our best, Dr. Figen, to say, let's look at your plan. What do you say you want to do with this plan? What activities will you execute? How will they make a difference until they make impact in the life of a person? If it doesn't pass that test, on an ongoing basis, because your theory of change doesn't make sense. Lastly, seamlessness. Dr. Sumododa spoke about that. I can tell you, we can't, I repeat this. This is what the president spoke about, consensus. We can't be a national government in space.
We're national government where there's provincial government. And provincial government is not waiting for us. It's living, it's doing something. Local government is doing something. Business is doing something. Labor is doing something. Singers are doing something. Everyone around us is doing something. Therefore, the bigger thing cannot be executed without us cohering. You don't have to do my thing, but at least I must know that this is what you are doing so that I can navigate mine around yours. Are we together? So that's what the president speaks about. Let's fight hard to work together. Oh, Bonang Muhale speaks about, behold the title. That book, if you read it, it says, we all have a responsibility to turn around this country. In a nutshell, read that book. It says, no one must wait somewhere and think that there's some great something that is going to make something. But for us to be seamless, we must discuss amongst ourselves where are we going, so that your going finds a relationship, and I must meander around your going as you meander around my going. But before I meander around your going, I must know you're going. Is that not so? So that I know at what point do I meet you. You know the train, Moses, when the other train is coming the other side, the other train doesn't see, but trains are moving. But there must be a light that shows that at a certain point this train is coming, but they must have known up front first. I love you guys. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, it sums up everything. The I love you. It's people sitting around here and online who care about the state. What Professor Mesarumule said is the most precious institution. And really, we cannot finish the conversation. It has to continue on the new item that we're introducing, which is lunch. It has to continue back in our workspaces, in our own environments. We will share some of the inputs that were made here so that that conversation continue. And now you know who to invite and give them more time than we have given. That's one thing I had to manage so that we cannot invite these eminent panelists and suddenly always stop them and cut them. Otherwise, the audience will really be offended. That why did you bring Professor Ngawen and suddenly cut him? How on earth do we allow the minister to deliver this and suddenly say he will not do the remarks at the end? So colleagues, on that note, the only item we can participate, all of us, is that one on the last page there. I will try my best to lead the singing of that important poem, which happens to be our national anthem. And after that, there will be lunch served. The ushers on the door will guide us to where it's going, but we'll request Minister and the panelists just remain for a photo opportunity here for posterity. And on that note, so the conversation is not closed. This is the beginning of the year, so the minister has charted the way forward, and clearly the most important thing is what all the panelists agree on. It's about implementation, implementation, implementation. Kosi sigaleli Afrika malupakanyisu pondalayo hizwa imitandazo yetu kosi sigelela tina losapolwayo morena buluk sichaba saheso uferiserin twale matswenye ho buluke hu usibuluke Sichabaza Jesus Sichabaza South Africa.
South Africa, a deep lofa on Sahel, a deep defanoncia, waronsia vachebeders van die kranse aan Vaudrien. Sounds the call to come together, and united we shall stand. Let us live and strive for freedom in South Africa, our land.
Thank you very much. So, next to the door, the organizers will guide us where to go, but we just request the minister and the panelists to take the photo.